You're with World News Today. Norwegian peace mediators say they are deeply concerned by Sri Lanka's decision to withdraw formally from a ceasefire agreement with Tamil Tiger rebels signed in 2002. The government says it withdrew because escalating violence made the Norwegian brokered truce redundant. Here's the BBC Sri Lanka correspondent Roland Berg.
Both sides are gearing up for an escalation of Sri Lanka's civil war. It is these Tamil Tiger fighters who will have to face an expected assault by government forces on the territory in the north they still control. With the ceasefire abandoned, Nordic truce monitors are likely to be pulled out of the country. For 2 years, they've documented the island's descent back into conflict.
Their presence in Sri Lanka is based upon the ceasefire agreement. So we can see a lot of difficulties with their further presence in Sri Lanka, and we expect that they will have to be withdrawn. But also this issue will of course have to be consulted with the government of Sri Lanka and with the LTT.
The government's announcement came hours after a bomb blast in the city of Colombo that was blamed on the Tigers. The target was a military bus, but civilians were caught up in the explosion. The government is confident after driving the rebels from the east, and ministers now say they will consider fresh negotiations only when the Tigers disarm.
I don't think we can speak to the LTT now. It's useless talking to them now. But that does not mean that in future, due to change of situations, right, if they decide to lay down their arms and come to talks with us, yes, government can reconsider.
In the city, regularly targeted since the fighting began a quarter of a century ago, people are divided about the end of the ceasefire.
This is the wrong thing to do. Tamils, Sinhalese and Muslims are dying in this war. There is no chance for peace now. What we need is peace.
What I have to say about the ceasefire is that even when it was in place, there was no difference. Even when the ceasefire was on, the LTTE violated it throughout.
Sri Lanka's ceasefire agreement had long been dead on the ground. Thousands of people have been killed in fighting in the last 2 years. But formally abandoning it is a signal of intent from the government, which now believes a military victory is in sight. Roland Burke, BBC News.
Let's go to Washington and Maneshka Eliatamby de Silva from Sri Lanka, who's at the Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University. Welcome to World News Today. Can I put it to you that realistically both sides have been manoeuvring themselves towards this outcome for at least the last 2 years?
They have been. Like Roland said, the ceasefire has been dead on the ground since December of 2005, and we've seen an escalation in the number of attacks, both by the LTT as well as offensives by the government in the last few months.
When you look at the very daring attacks, particularly on an air base where a large number of aircraft were destroyed and quite a significant number of military personnel killed, was that, do you think, designed by the Tamil Tigers to force the government to do exactly this?
Well, I think that certainly that kind of did act as a trigger, but there have been internal pressures from within the government as well. The hardliners, the JVP and the JHU, who are parties to the coalition government, have been pressuring President Mahinda Rajapaksa's government to call for an end to the ceasefire for quite a while now. So, and the JVP, in fact, even abstained from voting in the national budget last month because they wanted an end to the ceasefire. They called for this for quite a while now.
Now, unsung heroes in all of this have been the Norwegian government, who brokered this ceasefire 5 years ago. They must be furious and exasperated. Had they virtually come to the end of the road with every single possible way of getting the ceasefire maintained? Well, you know,
Nick, there's the Norwegians, there's a lot to be learned from what the Norwegians did for the Sri Lankan peace process. But in essence, the ceasefire did not have teeth. It ended up becoming a scorekeeper for all the violations that both the Sri Lankan government and the LTT have committed over the years. And any future peace process needs to include more muscle. It has to be more than a scorekeeper.
Well, finally, let me put this to you. When you see what's, for example, happened in Northern Ireland, there are always setbacks in any peace process, but both sides eventually become fatigued. Could this just be a rather annoying blip on a road towards some kind of settlement?
Well, Nick, I'd really like to think that it's just a blip in the road, but all indicators show that this is possibly the beginning of an all-out war on the part of the Sri Lankan government as well as the LTTE. They're certainly on a war footing at this point, and the war might begin at the end of the monsoons in January, or it could even be right after Sri Lanka's 60th independence celebrations in early February.
Maneshka Eliatamby de Silva, thank you very much with that gloomy assessment right at the end of that interview from Washington. Thanks for joining us. You're with BBC World. This is World News Today. I'm Nick Gowing.